Hello and welcome to Deep Impact, a proud member of the Duff Network where we dive deep into Wildbow's most spooky work 5 years on. Coming up next is Elliot Diebold.
And that was Ruben Morehouse.
And we are back for Breach 3.2. And we continue immediately where Breach 3.1 left off, where Blake says to the Briar Girl that he wants to utterly destroy the Behaims and Duchamps. And immediately she reacts poorly to this.
Her little rabbit thing leaps out of her arms and turns into this giant wolf, bear, eagle, like man, bear, pig type monstrosity. It's a very scary visual, and really sets a bad vibe for the negotiations.
Yeah, I like how it would have been very easy for it to just kind of turn into a wolf, right? But it doesn't. It turns into this wolf thing with like kind of scales, kind of like teeth that don't fit right. Clearly just some kind of hybrid of different natural concepts, which is very cool.
Yeah. And so then there's a bit, like, as they sort of start negotiating again, where Blake says to the Briar Girl and her familiar that the conservation of ninjutsu isn't in effect here. And I had to go look that up on TV tropes. I was not familiar with that particular trope, but it makes sense. It's basically, that idea that when you have like 100 grunts fighting one sort of superhero or villain, like the one person has just as much power as all the 100. So, they always do a lot better. And you've just kind of got 100 idiots versus one master. You're
right. It's not I don't know if it's a concept that Briar Girl will be super familiar with.
Know your audience, Blake. She doesn't seem like a particularly trope-savvy individual.
It doesn't seem like it's a great start to the negotiations, I suppose. Which, I guess, the negotiations have almost immediately soured. Briar Girl basically takes the tone of, well, I'm just going to kill you, change my view.
Because basically Blake is trying to... He appeals to this sense of, well, isn't it in our mutual interests in terms of power if we overthrow the Behaims and Duchamps?
Yeah.
And, I mean, this is sort of what I was saying last episode. I thought this was a very good thing because, like, obviously she'd be in that camp. And turns out she's not. And everything I was saying about how she would be a good ally was kind of wrong. Because she doesn't really give any shits about power dynamics, really. I had totally misread her in the same way Blake had.
Yeah, because Blake and Rose kind of point out that every practitioner they've ever met has been all about gathering power. Briar Girl doesn't give a shit about that. She just wants to live in her own little corner of the world. And Blake is intruding on that corner. And so at the moment, he's the only thing... Getting rid of him specifically is the only thing that she really cares about.
Yeah. No, you're right. Like, I think it's really interesting to talk a bit about her motivations. Yeah. Because, like, I had been working off the same assumption as Blake that she was just your typical power-hungry practitioner. And I guess that's our fault for trying to label things so simply. We keep getting told not to. But yeah, you're right. She just seems to, she apparently awakened or whatever and just decided she wanted to go and chill in the forest, or at least that's what she thinks she wants. Like, with this weird familiar dynamic she has, you can't be convinced. I'm not totally convinced that maybe things weren't pushed in that direction, but at the very least, the current pairing of the two of them just really likes this little patch of forest they've got. They're not even like full on. I kind of thought she was going to be like this big environmentalist, but it's not even really that. She just likes her little forest and she wants to live there. And, it's just that the Thorburns technically own it, so she can't form a domain there.
Yeah. I think the thing I like about this is the way that they kind of define nature. Within the context of the Briar Girl, because now that we know she was the one who created and sent these bird skull things, we do have the official name for them, but I'm not going to use it. Now that we know that, it doesn't. Traditionally, the idea of necromancy wouldn't like blend with the idea of being, environmentalist. But I like the way that she kind of defines it as recycling. It's a very cool little tweak on this kind of character trope that you might see in other media, right?
Yeah, and because like we've seen that the natural order in Pact is pretty brutal and unfair. Like, you know, the whole concept that spirits hold, karma and stuff associated with your parents with you, I would think is pretty unfair. But, you know, as I sort of said, it needs to go somewhere. But yeah, like we've seen in Pact, nature is pretty intense, and so this really fits with that. And it's not something I would have thought either, but it actually does fit quite well and makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and this gives Briar Girl kind of uses this explanation to give a hint towards why she hates Blake and Rose, because she hates Diabolists. Diabolists use demons, and demons are outside the natural order. They're not life or death. They are the abstract. They're the void. They are nothing, right?
Yeah, they're destruction in a way that goes beyond the natural order.
Yeah, yeah. So makes sense that she would hate them. I mean, it's kind of a pretty defensible viewpoint, I reckon.
Yeah, I mean, essentially we find out that her position here is really she just hates them because they're Diabolists. And, like, based on everything we know about Diabolists and demons, like, it's just such a reasonable viewpoint to have. You can't really fault her for it.
Yeah, she actually gives a bit more of explanation to Blake and Rose about how demons do this thing where they make the world a bit worse. They kind of send out, like, almost like the spirits, send out little demons that just go and fuck things up while people aren't really paying attention. Making a car run out of fuel when it's trying to take somebody to the hospital, or turning off a light that may kind of reveal something important, right? They just kind of fuck shit up.
Yeah, it's a cool, like, it's a very pragmatic little explanation for how giving the demons a foothold really sets humanity back a bit. I kind of liked the simple idea of just how all the lights in the world dim, but I agree it doesn't really hold up when in a world where science is sort of there. And this is always a tricky line for modern fantasy stuff to walk, like the science versus magic. So I think this is just the story trying to land on that one side of that. And
totally.
I like the little history lesson we get as well that Rose says probably isn't true. But essentially, like, all these demons were sort of the operators of God or the original gods or whatever. And then some of them turned to destruction as a sort of balancing act, and now they're just sort of inherently evil or something. It was very vague, and Rose seems to think it's not correct. So I mean, I guess I'll kind of ignore it for now. But I feel like they wouldn't have brought it up unless it ties into the truth somehow. I think
at the very least, it kind of shows the way that the Briar Girl sees the world, right? It kind of feels like the equivalent of, like, practitioner pseudoscience, where it's like, well, this is where the demons come from, and it definitely lets her demonize them. I don't know. But it's interesting at the very least to get an insight into the way she thinks about it. So they kind of get back to negotiating, and Briar Girl now kind of has the upper hand. She seems to be on the aggressive in their conversation here. She basically is, again, coming at this from the perspective of, well, I'll just kill you. What's the worst that could happen? I'll just kill you and make a deal with your next heir.
Yeah, and so now we get a little bit more of a concrete thing that's been hinted at, or it was hinted at in the last chapter, but Blake and Rose actually go through all of the heirs and why they would be worse for the Briar Girl to try and negotiate with.
Yeah, Rose says something interesting, which is, nobody's pretending that Blake is long for this world. And Blake's like, I'm pretending I'm long for this world.
Yeah, that's fucking classic. And, like, they don't really talk about it again, but, like, I have to believe there's a little bit more meaning behind that than just the sort of funny little joke that Blake makes. But, I mean, another interesting thing I noticed is Blake briefly, like, because we get this really cool sort of thing where we get to, as well as listing off the heirs and what's sort of wrong with them, Blake and Rose kind of compare and contrast their impressions of the various members of the family, which reveals a bit about their various timeline differences and whatnot. but Blake specifically is the only one who talks about his sister. Like Rose doesn't really mention it, and I just realized we haven't really seen a concrete reaction by Rose to the fact that in this timeline she has a sister, because I think we've gotten the impression that she's an only child still, because the parents wanted a daughter, so there was no reason to have a daughter.
They didn't need to make another daughter after they had Maggie.
So yeah, like I just sort of noticed that we haven't really seen Rose's reaction to finding out that she has a sister in this timeline, because that's kind of a big deal.
Yeah, you would think she wants to like go and meet her or something, but it doesn't really come up. I guess they have bigger things to worry about. I don't know.
Yeah, not yet. Anyway. Yeah, I mean, so far the two of them haven't really had contact with anyone outside of, like, Maggie and the Bahamians and the lawyers. Like, they haven't reached out to the family, except for that one confrontation. But, like, Blake's friends and their family haven't really been something they've talked to yet.
Yeah. Anyway, Blake and Rose kind of run through the list of heirs, and eventually Briar Girl kind of realizes they're the best option, and they strike a deal. The Briar Girl agrees to let Blake and Rose leave unharmed, and Blake agrees to investigate whether it's possible to move the house, which is like such a weird agreement.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the answer is almost certainly no, without without some insane cost that just means he won't want to do it. But he frames it to the Briar Girl. It's like that's useful information for her to have. So she ends up taking the deal. But what I think a big part of it here is, we're talking about these power shifts. They initially ask for a lot more. They want her to help them with lead, and she manages to haggle them down to just letting them leave alive, which is not an insignificant deal, but it's less than they were going for.
The deal they made, though, is just... It reminds me of the deal they made with Patrick, right? Which is just, do this for us, and we'll consider doing something for you, basically.
Yeah. And I mean, they sort of, it is useful information for Briar Girl to have, which is sort of why it does kind of work. But yeah, it's neither of them really give that much in this first deal, but it really feels like at least they made a deal. That's the achievement here.
Well, yeah, but it's not great when every negotiation you enter, your opening bargain has to be, now how do I get them to let me leave this alive?
No, that is something they need to work on.
That's been all the deals they've made so far, which doesn't bode well.
No, that's true.
Then now that they've got that part out of the way, now that Blake at least will survive, they make a second deal, basically. The Briar Girl agrees to give Blake some info on how she kind of augmented her senses, how to do that, and Blake agrees to give her more land, basically.
This would be the first piece of land he's actually giving her, I think, because she never took that original deal. So this is just, he's going to give her some land if she gives him info he can use against Laird, because she doesn't want to actually help him. And I love this little bit because she's like, oh, but you've got to double it if Laird finds out, because I don't want trouble with him. And Blake's like, yeah, that's fair. If it's my fault, then that Laird finds out, then that's fine. And she kind of frowns a bit, and there's this sense that she was planning on just going and telling him.
I think it's almost explicitly stated, like Blake thinks explicitly, she was just going to tell him. And that is proven correct when when they make this deal, and then Briar Girl's basically like, well, I'm going to tell Laird what you're up to unless you double the amount of land I have.
Yep. So she's still doing it.
Doesn't even wait 5 seconds. Yeah.
And then Blake and Rose kind of one-up her by threatening to just randomly claim some land in the middle of the forest just so she can't have it, to fuck with her.
Yeah, like claim their domain as just a random piece of land to fuck with her.
Yeah, and things get pretty hostile at that point. There's some harsh and non-hypothetical words thrown around. But eventually...
They clearly struck a nerve.
Yeah, it works. And so they reach a third and final deal where they will stop threatening to do that if she doesn't tell Laird about the plan.
A good deal, I think.
Yeah.
We won't fuck with you if you won't fuck with us. Should kind of be the baseline, but they get there.
Yeah. This is not a friendly relationship, even though there's a number of deals on the board now.
Yeah, they're already 2 deals in, and they still are fucking with each other.
But yeah, there's been this shift of power, and I think, now it's more even. Like, we're sort of leaving here with a sense that the two parties are more on equal footing. Like, Briar Girl's still very cagey about future dealings, but there's a sense that Blake and Rose actually got something they wanted out of her.
Yeah, explicitly, because she explains how to augment your senses, how to change to be more animalistic, which is basically just pouring animal blood all over yourself. So maybe Blake could have kind of figured that out on his own, but still good to have it confirmed.
Well, yeah, Rose Senior explicitly used this sort of thing, I'm pretty sure, in her interlude. Like, I think she says she took the form of like a cat at her school, which is like R.I.P. that cat, I guess. But yeah, like, it seems like something that was probably in his library already, so I don't know, he maybe could have asked for something a bit better, but he sort of inadvertently gets a lot of detail on the fairy hair that he's got with him, because the Briar Girl's very interested in that and offers him a lot of info on it in an attempt to get him to give it up.
Which is not a great strategy. Like, let me tell you how powerful this thing is, and then you'll give it to me. It's an interesting point that you point out that Rose Senior had this animal changing thing referenced in her interlude, though, because Briar Girl does keep referencing that she has a teacher who it's kind of hinted that she had a bit of a falling out with. It's a bit unclear.
Yeah, well, she references her teacher throughout all this, and she gets upset when Blake tries to find out who it is, and it just feels like a thing. This is almost certainly a thing. And I started to wonder if she was a runaway from one of the families or something, so I went to look for a physical description of her, because most of the families we've seen so far have pretty standard looks between them.
Yep.
And there hasn't really been a description of the Briar Girl, which made me even more suspicious. All we know is that she's a plain girl.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? After you wrote that, I thought, oh, no, surely there has been. And I went back and looked, and no, we first see her in the visions, and she's just described as, like, bundled up in warm clothes. And then at the council meeting, Blake sees a girl and says, oh, that's the Briar Girl, but we don't actually get any kind of description of her.
Yeah, there's one during the council meeting where he describes her as plain, and that's as much detail as we've gotten, which is nothing.
Now the puzzle pieces are falling into place.
So yeah, it feels like the easy sort of answer to guess here is that Rose Senior, just because, you know, she's so close to the house and all that, but you know, her knowledge, or Rose Senior's knowledge of her in the diary doesn't quite line up with that. So unless Rose Senior was hiding it for some reason, I think it's probably something else, but it's going to be a thing, surely.
All right, well, we'll see. So Blake and Rose leave after making these 3 deals, and Rose kind of explicitly calls Blake out on the same thing we called him out on last chapter, where he has been just saying that he would point out what he's planning to do, but never actually doing it, which is great. Go Rose.
Yeah, well, and it's like, because she's sort of like, so you're just going to tell me what you're thinking? Because, you know, I don't want you to run off and just not really tell me anything and ask me if I'm okay with it. And Blake's like, oh, I only did that once. She's like, no, you didn't.
No, you've done it every time.
And it's a bit of like an oh shit moment for Blake, which is hilarious. But then it's even funnier because then Rose is like, also, I feel like you're probably thinking that you want to promise me that you won't do that. Don't, because you're going to break that promise. Like, shit, there's absolutely
Rose has really got a good read on him.
Yeah, there's absolutely no faith on Rose's end, and I think she's right. So she's like, can you just try and be better? And I think we see in a little bit that he kind of is.
Yeah.
It does seem to work. Like, I think it appears that he just genuinely hadn't noticed that this was a pattern he was in, and when it was called out to him, he's trying to work on it.
Yeah, which is good. I mean, it's a good sign that she's able to call him out on his obliviousness.
Yeah.
So Blake explains that talking to the Briar Girl kind of was like a test run to see if he could stomach talking to Maggie. The Briar Girl was someone who had tried to kill him. Maggie was someone who had killed, his favorite cousin. So he wants to try and basically talk to Maggie and see if he can get her to help, maybe get some of the other local isolated practitioners to help fuck with Laird.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, so he's playing at the moment, like they talk about how, Laird's a pretty solid mastermind, so they're probably not going to beat him at that game. So, like, part of the tactics they talk is just trying to find Laird and just violently attack him, because that's not really like the field he would prefer to play on, they think.
Yeah. He's a schemer, and the way you deal with a schemer is
Just
fuck
charge
shit
at
up.
him. Yeah.
Blake
Yeah.
kind of referenced this last chapter as well when he talked about knocking over all the chess pieces and strutting around on the board.
Yeah.
Just kind of mixing shit up.
Yeah. And so what's interesting is this plan at the moment seems to be get some pokey goblins off Maggie and just sort of throw them at Laird, which I have to believe if it was that easy, Johans would have done it. Like, they specifically call out Johans as someone they should talk to.
Yeah.
And I don't know, if it was that easy, he'd probably be ruling the area by now because he's pretty powerful and we've seen he's got lots of goblins and stuff. So he seems like someone they should go and talk to figure out how or how not to try and attack the Behames and the Duchamps.
Yeah, but if they go and talk to Johannes, there'll be a price for every question.
Yeah, that's true. But that's sort of the state they're in. They're willing to make deals to attack those families. So
yeah,
I don't see why not. But yeah, anyway, I like this bit when they get back to the house and Blake opens the door and goes to hold it open for Rose before kind of realizing that that's ridiculous. She's in the mirrors. And he kind of like embarrassingly jumps back into the house and is just like, oh, good, Rose didn't really see that. But I think it's important because it shows that he does think of Rose in this moment. And I'm hoping it's a sign of better coordination between the two despite what happens soon.
Well, despite the fact that Blake can be oblivious, I think the fact, the way he treats June and now I suppose Leonard indicates that he's got a good heart. And this is the same thing for Rose. Although Blake does treat others as people, as evidenced by June, so maybe it doesn't mean that he thinks of her as a human. He just kind of is nice.
Yeah, well, I think Rose has said in the end of Arc 2 that Blake's heart is in the right place. She just doesn't. So I think that's Rose's read on Blake, and I'd probably agree with it.
Yeah.
His heart's in the right place, but he's not. His head isn't always.
Yeah. So now that they're back inside, Blake basically, and Blake has learned more about this hair. He starts using it to change his shape. He changes his appearance, I guess, more than his shape.
We skipped over a bit. The Briar Girl, one of the deals was the Briar Girl had to tell them some info on how to shape change, and basically when Blake, he wanted to know if the hair would help, and she was basically like, just use that, like forget the main ritual. The hair by itself is probably better because it sounds like it's less risky. In the sense that if it goes wrong, you're not stuck as a cat or something. You just...
Or you don't get, like, Vic-style possessed.
Yeah, exactly. So basically the plan at the moment is just to use the hair by itself and not worry about the rest of the info.
Yeah, and he starts doing this, and it works really well. He basically is very easily able to change his form. Not just his form. There's a part where he... let me read the quote. "Crazy," I commented. I ran my hands down the length of my throat, then said in a different voice, "Crazy." Just like, easy peasy.
Yeah, he's just running his hands over himself and just completely changing. And I think that passage, you're right, it really sells just how comprehensive and simple this has turned out to be for him. And it's funny because he believes... Well, he believes it's so easy for him just because he believes it's so easy for him. Like, it's that weird catch-22 you get with glamours. Yeah. So of course, Rose comes back in and is like, it shouldn't be this easy. And he's like, stop telling me that because it might become true.
Say that.
But they do sort of have a quick conversation about how maybe it's so easy for him for bad reasons. Like, is there a catch they're not aware of? Or is it because Blake is so faded that, like, it's easier to replace him? Which is not a good... not a good concept as a possibility.
Well, Blake, they recognize that it's pretty useful, and Blake's defense is, well, it was hard to get, but if this proves to be more useful than that jewel was dangerous, I agree we should be suspicious. And then we jump forward. The glamour was really fucking useful, as it turned out. Damn it.
Yeah, this is a fantastic, scene change. Just a way to sort of skip ahead, but we tie the two things together. It's hilarious. It's a hilarious little, opener.
Yeah. So Blake has been able to completely change his form, and he goes to meet Maggie at her school. And we see, Duchamp and Behame children walk past him and not give him a second look.
Yeah.
And he approaches Maggie and basically starts pranking her. I mean, he's like pretending to be someone else and just kind of having fun with it, which is a bit... he seems to be enjoying himself despite how mad he must be at Maggie here.
Yeah, I think it'd be hard not to. It does actually sound like it would be a lot of fun.
Yeah.
But yeah, I love just when he approaches Maggie and Maggie just sasses him so hard. It's hilarious. Like, she's so much fun. And this conversation they have where, then her dad comes in and everyone's sort of double speaking and like, Maggie sort of asks Blake, like there's one point where Maggie asks Blake, are you trying to mess with the Thorburns? And he's sort of like, and says, kind of implies a yes as a sort of test.
Yes.
And she passes him. And then later on, as he's sort of backtracking on it, he has to sort of say, well, I can't say I don't have any quarrel with the Thorburns, which is just...
Very true.
Yeah, it's such a great little line. Like, that's really the power of this whole practitioners have to spell the truth thing, tell the truth, is he had to say that.
He actively goes to say, I have no quarrel with the Thorburns, and has to catch himself, which is great. I love it. As he's kind of in his glamour form and Maggie recognizes him, she says his name. And it's interesting because we really get a feel for the frailty, I guess, of glamours here. Every time she said my name, I could see the connection striving to appear, hammering at my glamour like a battering ram slamming into a heavy door. A great image. And I think a great way to kind of set up the limitations of glamour. Like, Blake has now got this source of disguising himself, and that's something that can clearly come in quite handy. So it's good to set up, like, it's frail, here's what kind of damages it, here's what could happen if it gets too damaged. Those kinds of rules to set up these situations that will happen later.
Yeah, definitely.
So eventually Maggie agrees to give Blake some goblins in a can, as well as a trained goblin named Dick Swizzle, which is a great name for a goblin.
Yeah, I really want to know how these goblins get their names, because it just seems like either their parents are dicks or they're self-naming themselves, in which case they're all dicks. But it's just it's a funny beat.
I mean, we explicitly see here that Maggie isn't able to really control Dick Swizzle because of his name, which she can't say. It just seems like the inability to swear is so uniquely crafted to make her life as a goblin queen or whatever more difficult.
Yeah, you're right. I hadn't quite noticed that, but that's so spot on. Like, she's trying to specialize in goblins, and all of them seem to have pretty crass names. So it's a pretty big limitation that she can't say them.
Yeah, she can't command them by name. Anyway, so Dick Swizzle is a goblin that responds to the holder of this little silver whistle. And Blake holds the whistle and commands Dick Swizzle, and he doesn't come. What's going on? And then Rose commands him to come, and he goes to her. And Rose says, well, yeah, so about that thing I was going to tell you about. And then our chapter ends.
Yeah, because I guess we skipped over it before, but Rose had mentioned that there was something she needed to tell Blake earlier, but she wouldn't do it right now. And obviously,
I think she explicitly says, "Hey, let's talk about this now. So in case anything comes up and the tables turn, we've got this covered." And Blake's like, "What are you trying to say?" And she goes, "Oh, later."
And yeah, it's just great. Like when Maggie brings out this whistle, and it's like, oh, it'll respond to whoever has the whistle, and Rose is just sort of like, oh, crud. And you're kind of like, oh, that's a weird reaction. And then obviously we see that it responds to her, and it's forcing her hand, and it's just, it's such a great cliffhanger. We should wrap up now so that I can go and read the next chapter and find out what's going on.
Well, I think we this is such a fun cliffhanger. We wanted to talk about it more, and so we're going to skip over doing an extra bit this week. Or our extra bit this week is just going to be talking about what this cliffhanger could mean. I mean, I'll let you handle this part, Elliot, because I know how this story goes.
Fair enough. Well, so I kind of agreed to this partially because there's something I noticed a little bit in Arc 1 and again towards the end of Arc 2, and I haven't really had a chance to dive into it, and so this seemed like a good excuse. Which is, I've noticed there's been this weird, throughout the story, almost like yo-yo effect in between Blake and Rose's like moods and how they're sort of operating. So, and this sort of, we had this directly called to our attention in the last chapter where Blake sort of has this line where he goes, odd that Rose seemed so diminished when I felt more energized. Was there something to that? So this sort of calls attention to it explicitly, but there's definitely been some foreshadowing, I think. In Arc 1, we had that bit where Blake really wanted to get out of the contract when they first sort of saw it, and Rose talked him out of it. And then it was like the next chapter, they had the opposite argument because Rose wanted to do the witch hunter stuff to get out of it, and Blake was suddenly against it. And I think I called out how that sort of seemed a bit odd to me. Like it could be normal, but maybe it's not. I guess that's the whole point of this segment. And then, you know, sort of all throughout Arc 2 in particular, we saw the two of them kind of often complement each other quite well. And it always seems like they're, you know, there's the character differences that explain that. But there's this real sense that when one of them is sort of weakened or ineffectual at the time, the other one sort of steps up. And so obviously I've been theorizing that they're sort of swapping places, and it seems like there's something like that happening that sort of got confirmed last chapter. But since this is a Wildbow story, it's probably not as simple as Rose slowly takes Blake's place and he ends up in the mirror or dead, the end. So I wonder if, you know, I've been thinking this whole time that there's maybe more of a mental element to the transference. You know, like they're taking on each other's personality as well. So now I'm wondering, as I've sort of been talking now, Rose is a vestige, and she's meant to be Blake. And so I wonder if, like, you know, because this is such a symbolic world, if they're not transferring, but they're, like, merging, like, if she's not just straight up replacing him, but they're sort of, you know, Rose Senior has specifically created Rose as a way to merge the two of them together into some sort of super heir. You know, she created the perfect heir by creating Rose to complement Blake in what she probably perceived as his potential weaknesses. So I don't know.
So
I don't know how convinced I am of this, but I guess I'm throwing it out there.
So your previous major theory was that Rose and Blake would swap positions. Now you think Granny Rose created Rose to kind of eventually augment Blake into some kind of super group. Blake plus Rose equals something. Who knows?
I mean, yeah, maybe. I don't know. I probably need to sit on it more, but it definitely feels like there's more than just a straight up transference, and I think we're going to get some more details on it next. But part of it, at least, will be some sort of presumably some gender movement to make him more eligible as the heir, because that seemed to be a pretty strict requirement. That I assume I still assume that was not Rose Senior's requirement, but was more something, you know, a requirement she inherited as well.
Well, I have absolutely no comments on anything you've said in the past few minutes. So I guess we'll just have to see.
Yeah, I guess so.
But that's the end of our show for this few days. Our next episode, when we're talking about Breach 3.3, will be coming out in 2 days. It's another bonus chapter on the 20th of February.
Yes, so we'll see you all in 2 days on Wednesday. And, you know, if you want to get in touch with us before then, you can email us at mediamdpodcast@gmail.com.
Yep. Shoot us an email if you want to talk about the latest chapters or share your thoughts on why Elliot's crazy speculations are right on the money or totally off base. You can also share those thoughts in our discussion threads, which we will link down in the episode description down below.
Yes, you can also find more information on the episode at the Doof Media website, which is doofmedia.com.
Also at doofmedia.com, I want to talk about a show that I've been listening to lately called Vow to View, which you've probably heard of. I don't know. It's a show where Scott and Elise, who are two, you know, hosts from across the Doof Media network, who are also married, make each other watch movies, I guess, is kind of the loose the loose structure of the show.
Yeah, so the show's just undergone a bit of a format change, but essentially how it works is they pick a theme and they exchange movies that go along that theme. So I believe the theme that's just started earlier this week or late last week was horsepower.
Yeah, now that is on paper the structure of the show, but it really is more just about their dynamic and them just talking about random things. They talk about The Bachelor a lot and just other miscellaneous stuff. It's kind of a hard show to recommend, but the really strong selling point of it is they just have a great kind of chemistry that's really fun to listen to. So go check that out.
It's they're a lot of fun together, which makes sense because they got married.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't know. Either they got married to have great chemistry or they had great chemistry and then they got married. But either way, it makes for a good show.
And so, speaking of Doof, you can head over to patreon.com/doofmedia, where you'll find, the page all about how to donate to the Doof Network and really help all those shows like us and Vow to View keep going. And you get a bunch of cool stuff when you do that.
Yeah, or another way to help all those shows would be to support Wildbow's Patreon, because he writes content that then feeds into our show and one of the other major Doof Media shows. He's a great author and someone that we love to kind of support by doing these shows that are kind of talking about his work in detail. So go check out patreon.com/wildbow as well. And I guess that's that. That's all our stuff. So we'll see you on the 20th of February when we talk about Breach 3.3.
See ya.